Monica Ryan here with Keller Williams, and I'm just creating this video because I thought it might be some helpful ideas about marketing, getting your house ready for selling, and or just general questions that might be of interest.
Okay, so one of the main questions is, if I'm looking to sell my house, when's the best time to sell my house? Should I be waiting for the perfect market, or should I just act now?
You know, that really depends where your house is. Like, for instance, if your buyers are not child driven, their kids are grown and gone, then, you know, the school issue doesn't really enter the idea or enter the purpose of the timing. Kids are grown, they don't think about that. But if you have younger kids, of course, the best time traditionally is starting around spring, because that's when you start looking for property, and then you can get into escrow by summer and close before the school year starts. So that's important if you have children of school age.
What about like if the market's high or low? Like, should I wait around for, oh, the market's good now?
Yeah.
It's hard to predict the market. So
well, you know, it depends. I mean, obviously, if you're motivated to move because you found the perfect house somewhere else, then you buy low, you sell low, vice versa. So, you know, if you're selling and it's slightly lower, then what you're buying is probably going to follow suit. So the timing could fall in fine. Of course, if you're moving from California to Georgia, and you can buy, you know, 3 times of what you could here.
Okay.
Then, so.
Cool. Okay, let's say I'm selling, and I have a friend who appraises houses. Should I have my friend do the appraisal, thinking I'll get a better appraisal? And if so, why? If not, why? Or just a couple upside downside.
Well, I can understand why a seller would want it to be higher, just because they think, oh, my property, if I appraise it, and I can tell people that, then that may bring in the offers that are in reflect that appraisal. The problem with that is that appraisals that are conducted by a lender when you are in escrow and you've already established a sales price, they're very conservative today about appraising appropriately as to what the true market is, because of basically when the market went down in 2007 and we had that huge debacle where prices dropped, appraisers got pretty much slapped on the back of the hand, like, you guys need to really appraise appropriately. So they are now a little better than they were in the sense of not being so conservative. But typically an appraiser, as I said, that's going to come out on a sale is going to be a little more realistic and not just appraise at, you know, what they think the seller might want to hear. And the danger in that is that if you list your house too high, especially in a market where now it's starting to just balance out, where it's a little bit of a buyer's market, where a few months ago, even 6 months ago, it was a little bit of a seller's. You need to be careful that you don't price too high, so then you price yourself out of the market and you don't get the proper showings that will therefore bring in an offer.
And then I guess a good one to follow up with that is if I'm a buyer, how do I decide how much money to offer for a house I'm interested in? Like, is there a standard amount under listed price that I should aim for? How do I dictate that offer?
Well, that also depends on where you're buying. For instance, beach property, typically the agent's going to list at a pretty good price in the sense of what the comps will bear out. So some sellers, you know, some sellers will always overlist, but generally speaking, you don't want to come in too low where the seller is insulted. Because the comps, if you have a good agent and the agent knows the market, they're going to talk to you about the comps in that area, specifics for square footage, bedrooms, upgrades, the property around it, you know. So in that respect, then what I've noticed, what the homes are selling for right now versus what they were listed for, it's about a 2 to 3% differential, which is pretty good. You know, back in 2007, when the market dumped, my goodness, it was 15%. So I think as a general rule, again, it depends on also the buyer pool for that. You know, if something comes up that's highly desirable in a very desirable area that's priced right and is in great condition, you could have multiple offers.
Yeah, and you're competing with other buyers
Exactly.
now.
So you may end up coming in over asking.
Yeah.
So that's, you know.
So it depends, like most things.
Right. Yes. Exactly.
Okay, so back to being a seller. Should I do any house inspections before I list? For instance, maybe termites, so that A, I know ahead of time what I'm getting into, and B, I can be honest and upfront, because, you know, I don't want to surprise a buyer after I think he or she is buying, and then we lose a deal.
Right. Well, again, that depends. For instance, I have a client who has had an ongoing inspection from a company within the HOA, the Homeowner Association, does their own inspection once a year.
Okay.
But he also has a termite company that also checks for bugs. And he's been doing it on a religious basis probably every 8-9 months. So someone like that that's on top of it, it's not really an issue so much that you have to do it ahead of time. But if you're selling a home that you've lived in for 30 years, you haven't had a termite inspection, it's probably not a bad idea, because then you know up front what you're looking into cost-wise, because typically, and it's not always, it always depends on negotiation, but typically the seller does pay for the termite inspection and the work completed. And again, that's all negotiable, but typically in our part of California,
yeah, everything's negotiable,
right,
pretty much.
But typically the seller does pay for it, because it's paid through escrow.
Okay.
They don't have to pay up front. Once you sell it and it's your open escrow, all the funds from the sale go to pay for that. So it's not so burdensome on the seller.
Okay. All right.
And also,
go ahead.
well, and if it is clear, then the report is typically not that expensive, and that's also can be paid through escrow, unless you do it 6 months ahead of time. But that's not really smart to do, because unfortunately, termites, you could do an inspection and they could surface again in even 3 months.
Yeah.
So anyway,
as far as things, let's say I'm selling and I still live in the house, and there's things in the house that I don't want sold with the house, but I don't want to take them out. What's the best way to handle
the exclusions?
Not getting into drama.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, for instance, I had a client that had this, antique chandelier that was in the family for years. She left it in the home because it showed so beautifully. However, in the listing, I listed it as an exclusion. And so when the agent that is showing the property will always check that, and they'll tell their buyer, by the way, this is not going to be part of the sales price, because in the contract it states that everything attached in the property, even that means draperies, attached. So you have to be careful about that. But usually, that if you're smart and you think about it up front and you put it as an exclusion, then it takes care of that, and you don't have any drama at the end where, oh my gosh, that's why I bought the house. Yeah.
You basically always communicate, always be upfront. Don't surprise a buyer, because that just leads to trouble.
Yeah. And you have nothing, that's the best policy, frankly.
I think that's pretty good.
And then one other thing just about inspections that I thought about that is really important for some sellers to know is the buyer always does it, well, not always. If it's a tear down, they don't need to do a physical inspection. But 99% of the time, a buyer will always do a physical inspection, which I honestly would never even think about recommending to a buyer that they don't do one. And typically the buyer does pay for it, and it's worth every dime. You have an inspector go through and he checks everything in the home. He'll come in and check the flooring, the baseboards, even go under the house and see if there's any issues with plumbing, etc. It's very thorough, and it's worth, of course, what I said, the price. So in that respect, let's just say that he finds a problem with the shower pan in the shower, which could lead to termites, dry rot. And the house, the buyer got at a reduced price. Let's say they negotiate and the seller feels like, gee, you're getting a really good price. Well, the buyer can come back with what's called a request for repair to the seller,
Okay.
stating, okay, I'm buying the house, but I want you to fix the drain in the shower. I want you to repaint the baseboards. I want you to fix the air conditioning unit that's not working 100%. That's fine. The buyer can do that, but the seller can also simply say we won't do that because we feel that you're getting such a good price that we are not going to invest that money. I haven't seen that happen a lot. Most sellers are, they're fine with it. But sometimes if the buyer gets a little too nitpicky about, minor things, like, oh, there's a scuff on the baseboard. Well, that's part of life, really.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and what's your website where people can get, newsletters and updates and things like that?
Right. MonicaSellsBeachProperties.com.
All right,
Pretty easy.
all one word, obviously.
All one word.
Okay, and then you can be found on Facebook at Monica Ryan.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll be back with more questions as they come.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.